This video is part one of a two-part series where I'm going to be painting my dashboard red the way that it comes in the F32 4 Series. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while now. I have priced out used dashboards from eBay. I've looked into different methods of painting interior parts. I found a company that makes interior paint in OEM colors, and the coral red that I tested was a perfect color match. So because taking the dash out is pretty involved, as I understand, I figured that could be its own separate video. And then in the next video, we can just focus on the painting and everything involved in that process. Alright, so I actually don't know how to take this dashboard out, but I've done enough interior mods over the years where I've taken sections of the dashboard apart that I think I can figure it out. I think we'll just start with the stuff that I know how to do, and then we'll take a look at what's left. Because we're removing airbags and electronics, it's critical to disconnect the battery. Remove the airbag by depressing the locking spring in the steering column while simultaneously pulling out. Over the years, I found that the blunt tip of an Allen wrench is the perfect tool for this. Carefully unplug the airbag harness and set it aside. Next, unplug the steering wheel harness from the clock spring. A pick tool is helpful for unclipping some of these. The 16mm steering wheel bolt is no joke. Don't be surprised if you need some extra leverage. Wiggle the wheel free from the steering column and set it aside. The plastic covers for the steering column just pull apart. You want to pull the column out and up to give them clearance from the dash. Be careful to unplug the key sensor from the lower portion. Remove the 4 7mm bolts from the clock spring. Notice that I'm using hand tools for this project. That's because a lot of this hardware just goes into plastic and I don't want to take a chance of stripping anything. Unplug the 2 harnesses from the back side. The second one has a locking mechanism and it's easier to reach once you pull the clock spring away from the column. The top portion is attached to the dash by this little leather apron. I used needle nose pliers to unclip it. As I'm going along, I'm storing the hardware with each corresponding part I remove. The instrument cluster just has 2 T20 screws at the top. Remove them and lean the cluster forward, then pull out. Disconnect the harness and the orange fiber optic cable. Be mindful of this cable throughout the DIY as fiber optics are delicate and it can break if the cable is bent. The air vent to the left of the wheel simply pulls out. I have a P3 gauge installed in mine, so I'm plugging it from the OBD port, but your car probably won't have these extra electronics. The headlight switch has 2 metal clips in the top. Push down on these clips while pulling out on the switch, then unplug it and set it aside. This storage compartment has 2 T20 screws on the top. Removing these will allow you to take out the locking plate inside the dash. Before the interior gets any more chaotic, I decided it was a good time to start labeling the harnesses. The main dashboard trim also just pulls out. Be careful with the thin piece on the end. Then unplug the harnesses for the emergency flashers and the dash climate control. The passenger air vent had 2 T20 screws on the bottom. After removing this cover, you'll have access to 4 T20 screws for the radio and climate control faceplate. Unplug it and set it aside. The iDrive screen has 2 T20 screws at the base, then you can lift it out and unplug it. Push the start-stop button out from the rear and unplug it. The glove box proved to be one of the trickier items. When you open it, there are 4 T20 screws along the top. Pull the weather stripping out of the way to remove this cover. This gives you access to a longer T20 on the side. Next, pull down the bottom cover. There's normally 2 10mm nuts that hold this on, but I've lost mine. Disconnect the 12-volt outlet and the passenger footwell light. The passenger footwell airbag is in the way of a few more screws. The airbag bolts are T30s. Alright, just a heads up, these T30s that hold the airbag in, they have blue Loctite on them. And so you have to be really careful taking them out. Make sure that it's seated all the way and you have some leverage. That way you don't strip it. Had a close call with this one. Getting the airbag out of the way will reveal a few more T20 screws on the bottom of the glove box. Be sure to prop your airbag up with something so there's no tension on the harness like how I had mine in this shot. With the glove box pulled out, there's a few more harnesses on the top. There's a light, a secret lock for the trunk, and I'm not sure what this third one is for. The harness for the airbag is clipped onto the back of the glove box, so again I'm using pliers to release the fastener, and finally the glove box is free. At this point, I was starting to question my life choices. After all that work, it didn't seem like the dash was any closer to coming out until... we have movement. Alright, one thing that has helped tremendously for anyone who's going to do this at home is I went on eBay and I pulled up a picture of a used dashboard. This one is taken out of the car so I can kind of get an idea of where the final screws are, and when I zoom in on this, there's really not a whole lot of screws that actually hold this in. But now that I look at these pictures, I'm noticing that some of them are on the bottom side, so it looks like I'm going to have to remove the center console. I know that's even more work, but gotta do what you gotta do, so let's keep pushing. So one thing I wasn't sure about that was revealed by the eBay pics is that this plastic chassis that holds the head unit is part of the dashboard after all, which meant that the head unit needed to come out too. After removing the 2 T20 screws, you can pull it out and unplug the harnesses from the back side. There was one more dash screw behind the head unit. Upon removing the T20 near the driver air vent, the top of the dash was free. The center console doesn't need to come all the way out, but it does need to scoot back about 2 inches. Pull straight up on the center console trim and unplug the iDrive controller. Then remove a long T20 from the bottom of the dash. Remove the gear selector base plate and the drive mode switch. Use a pry tool to lift the back of the cup holder portion, then lift up and out. Mine is an aftermarket one with a wireless charger built in, so yours likely won't have this extra power wire, but you will have a key proximity sensor to unplug. There was one more long T20 under the cup holder. Alright, so this is day 2. Last night I was just at that point where I was starting to rush and get lazy and forget to film things, forget to label things, so I decided to call it a night and come back today with fresh eyes. But as you can see, all of the peripherals are out of the car at this point, and I think all that's left is the driver's side footwell airbag, and then the center console just needs to come back a couple inches, and I think that should be all we need to do to get the dash out, so let's do it. Remove 2 10mm nuts for the driver footwell cover and pull it down. Unplug the light, and I believe the speaker is for the door chime. The driver footwell airbag didn't need to come out after all. There was one small T20 at the bottom, and now all that's holding the dash in is the center console. There are 3 10mm bolts at the base of the center console and 2 10mm nuts at the rear under the rear climate control. Note that there's no physical connection between the gear selector and the automatic transmission. It's all drive-by-wire in this car. Next is the A-pillar trim. I had to text my friend Brian to figure out how to get these off, but you basically just pull out at the top to unclip it and then slide it up towards the ceiling. Looking inside the dash, you can see the passenger airbag. Use a pick tool to unlock the black and green harnesses and pull them out. They're color coded, so you don't need to worry about mixing them up for reassembly. Finally, there's one more harness on the bottom of the airbag. Even though I did my best to label all the harnesses, I'm taking pictures to make sure that each harness goes back to its corresponding hole in the dash before pulling it out. One thing I forgot was the dashboard speakers, but they ended up being easier to reach with the dash pulled away from the window. I am a little nervous about getting this thing back in once it's painted, that I don't screw up the paint job, but that's a problem for another day. What's kind of funny is that for all that work that we just did, I only counted about 9 or so screws that actually affix the dashboard skin to the frame of the car. I found the dash removal really interesting. You get a sense of how the car was put together, and you see the unique solutions to problems that the designers and engineers overcame, whether to simplify assembly or just to save money. Instead of using 4 screws, they'll use 2 screws at the top and have it hook in at the bottom. Instead of using a bunch of screws on the bottom, it's the center console that secures the dashboard in place. Or instead of using any screws, they use clips. These clips are probably cheaper than screws, and because they have the spring-loaded tension, it ensures that the part will always fit snug to the dash and won't rattle over time. You have to think, for every penny that they save in here where the end user is never going to see or care how it's put together, that's a penny that can be spent where it will matter to the customer, affording better quality leather for the seats, better brake and suspension components, engine R&D. I know some people are going to watch this video and say, really dude, all this just to paint your dashboard? You must be bored out of your mind or something, but to me, this experience was truly fascinating and I'm really happy I could share it with you guys. Stay tuned for the next video where we'll paint this thing and reveal how it looks in the car.